Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Cognitive Systems Institute speaker series call this morning. I'm happy to introduce Taylor Thompson. He's the Director of Partnerships at Curious Learning, where he's responsible for getting their adaptive learning platform in the hands of as many children as possible and generating revenue to sustain the nonprofit organization. Taylor has a background in startups and using mobile technology for international development, having founded a mobile technology company in India in 2007 and chairing the board of another since 2015. Welcome, Taylor. Thanks for being our presenter. And Taylor's going to talk to us this morning about using a mobile platform for early literacy education as a research sandbox. So let me turn the call over to you, Taylor.
Diane, thanks so much. So thanks, everyone, for joining. Before I get started, I wanted to give you a little overview of Curious Learning, the organization, which actually is now, as Diane said, a nonprofit, but started 5 years ago as a research project at MIT. And so my goal really is twofold today. One is to take you through the story of our research and some of what we found, and second, to share a little bit about the technology platform that we're building now, and over the next year to try to recruit some of you to do research using our platform to deliver cognitive interventions to children who are learning to read both in the U.S. and around the world. So let's see. So what we've done so far is shown that it's possible to achieve the equivalent of U.S. pre-K and kindergarten literacy outcomes for children, both in the U.S. and around the world, through mobile software alone, even when they have no access to schools. And so I thought to start out, I would show you a few videos that give you a sense for what this looks like at day one after a week and after about 9 months of using this software. So this was one of our sites in Uganda after kids were just handed out tablets and they weren't told how to use them. They started exploring the devices and talking to each other and eventually figured out how they work. This is about a week later. So as you see, not yet perfect, but they've learned quite a bit. And that was one of the participants after about 9 months of access to this software. So that's kind of what the system looks like now from the perspective of users in an emerging market. Now I'll share a little bit about our story and where the organization came from. We really started in 2011 as a research collaboration between scientists at the Media Lab at MIT, at Tufts, and at Georgia State University. And the work merged two streams of research. So the first was pioneered by Marianne Wolf, who's a cognitive scientist that focuses on the neuroscience of literacy and reading disabilities like dyslexia. And Marianne's work studies what happens when the brain learns to read, and the structural changes and how learning behaviors actually rewire the brain for reading and how that can go awry. And based on her research, she, among other things, she's created an evidence-based curriculum focused on early reading called RAVO that's been used in thousands of classrooms around the world and clinically validated in 2 RCTs. And this is one of the most common ways that children with reading disabilities learn to read, and it's informed by this neuroscience research of Marianne and her colleagues. The second researcher is Cynthia Brazil, who does work with social robots and affective computing at the MIT Media Lab. And to give you a sense of one of Cynthia's research projects, I'll share another short video showing how we can use social robots to act as learning companions for young children.
About a snowman. Once upon a time, there was a snowman, and he was alive.
And Cynthia's son actually was dyslexic and learned to read using Ravo, the curriculum that Marianne had developed. And as a result of that, Cynthia reached out to Marianne with the idea of seeing if it would be possible to take the principles that had made Ravo an effective conventional curriculum and make them available through mobile software to any child who had access to a smartphone or tablet. And the motivation was, within the next decade, even in the poorest parts of the world, almost every child will soon have access to a smartphone. And literacy is a key, not only educational bottleneck, that keeps people from being able to learn and participate in formal education, but with the ability to read, people can take advantage of other information and resources on the internet, as well as participate fully in the economy. And so the difference between literacy and illiteracy in countries like Ethiopia, where you saw the footage, or Uganda, where you saw the footage before, is the equivalent of 30 to 40% increase in salary for every year for the rest of your life. And so the team decided to try a simple pilot focusing on a community in Ethiopia with no school, no literacy at the home, and not even any English language use, but where English is aspirational because it's the language of instruction in school. This is a shot of one of the communities that we worked in 2012. And the approach was really simple. So Marianne's team curated a set of early learning apps based on her research. They loaded devices with these apps and gave them to children and allowed children to explore them and really respond to their curiosity as they used the apps and as they learned. And then to measure usage through the device and conduct periodic literacy assessments to test things like letter sound knowledge, letter naming, sight word reading, English vocabulary, and other early literacy and learning skills. And so after the first test happened after about 9 months, and then periodically over the course of 2 years, the team found that kids were using the software around 4 hours a day. And after the first year, median performance was equivalent to children who had attended a pre-K full-time in the U.S. And after 2 years, scores were almost as high as children who had attended both pre-K and kindergarten and were starting first grade. And so the team decided to try to replicate this, a similar study in the U.S. Among children in rural Alabama who had limited access, or in some cases no access to pre-K, and that the team found after 4 months similar results to attending pre-K in these key early literacy outcomes. So as a result, the team decided to try the situation or try similar studies with partners around the world and in more than 20 sites and around 5,000 children in 3 different contexts. The first, like Ethiopia, where children have no access to school at all and limited literacy, if any, at home. The second, in middle-income countries like Peru or South Africa or parts of India, where most children are enrolled in schools but have very limited access to resources. There's very little teacher training. There are often between 50 and 100 students per class. And then finally, in high-income countries like the U.S., where there are pockets of poverty and unequal access to education, where children often start out behind and many of them never catch up. And so across the board, we were seeing similar results for the learning outcomes that you expect in pre-K and kindergarten. And so the team decided to spin out a separate nonprofit, Curious Learning, based on this research, and really with 3 goals. The first is to reach the 200 million children around the world who don't have access to sufficient schooling to learn to read. The second is focusing on children in the U.S. without access to pre-K, who often start out formal education behind, and many of whom never catch up. And then finally, up to 10% of children have a reading disability, and many of those are not typically diagnosed until 3rd or 4th grade, if you have access to diagnosis at all, like in the U.S. And those children take a lot of resources and years to catch up and need to continue to basically compensate for the disability throughout their lives. But we believe that if we can identify them and treat earlier, it's easier to intervene, and the children will not fall as far behind in other areas of learning. And the opportunity we see is really threefold. There's a lot of money spent to improve early learning by 3 different kinds of stakeholders. So the first there are hundreds of thousands of apps that are already being built. The challenge is that it's very difficult to evaluate how effective different apps are overall, and specifically for individual children based on their learning stage and their learning style. And so a lot of the resources going into creating and using these apps could be used much better if we were able to measure their effectiveness and optimize their use for individual children. The second, as those of you on the call know, field research is very slow to conduct and expensive. And even if you're able to find an effective intervention, there's often limited incentive to go from a proven intervention to something that's implemented at scale, because in the academy, there's very limited incentives to scale up something once you've demonstrated that it's effective. And so as a result of this, there's not as much research that could be happening, or there's not as much research conducted as could happen. And once interventions have been found to be effective, there's limited translation of those interventions into policies at scale. And then the third challenge is that people who care about early learning, whether this is schools and governments, big institutions, or individual parents and teachers, have a really difficult time finding the best solution. They have to navigate between thousands of different tech companies and hundreds of thousands of apps to try to find, what they think will be best for their children at a given time. And the landscape is constantly changing, and there's a huge amount of knowledge required to do this. And so the process of identifying and curating effective content is very time-consuming and requires a lot of expertise. And so our goal was to use technology and to really build the infrastructure to help these 3 different stakeholders be able to find, scale up, and constantly improve early learning software interventions. And so now I'll take you through what our product looks like, and then I'll take you through what our organization does. And so the product is designed to have a really simple experience for end users who are children. And so we want to have a set of apps that they can access on any Android device that they can explore and is curated in a way that it optimizes their learning. So children play, the software tracks their usage and their learning outcomes and is able to adapt to maintain both engagement and deliver optimal learning outcomes, starting with early things like letter sound knowledge and sight word reading, and going on eventually to things like decoding and fluent literacy and other learning domains like numeracy and early math and scientific concepts as well. So for parents or teachers, the process is really simple. You can download an app launcher from the Google Play Store. You open that up and give a device to child, and within that launcher, there are a bunch of different apps that children can explore and play with. And then finally, as long as the device gets access to the internet periodically, it's able to upload the usage and outcomes data from the device to our servers and download new apps for the children to use. So the way the organization works to deliver this is really fourfold. So the first is the content team, and the goal is to make sure that the learning games that are available through this system are as effective as possible as kind of inputs into this process. And so what the content team does is first works with the existing universe of apps and app developers to curate the most effective apps and to negotiate the ability to distribute apps for free in low-income communities if they're paid apps. The second step is working with these app developers to improve the effectiveness of their existing content and to target new app development in the highest impact areas. So we've noticed that there are gaps in content, and so instead of creating yet another letter learning app, there's very limited content focused on decoding, so learning to sound out complete words and sentences. And then the third step that the content team focuses on is creating a framework and process to crowdsource localization of existing apps. So identifying apps that are easy to translate and make culturally relevant for learners in their native languages around the world, so that apps that were originally based in English and that have little economic incentive to be translated into more obscure languages can become accessible, in major languages like Hindi or then more more focused languages like the language Kinyarwanda or Zulu that only have millions or tens of millions of users rather than hundreds of millions. The second piece after the content team is our deployment process, which is really focused on getting the software in the hands of as many children as possible. And we do that in two ways. One is working directly with parents and teachers who own devices, and so basically marketing to them through other partners. It could be schools or it could be telecom companies, so that parents and teachers with smartphones can download the software and give the devices to children to use. The second are partnerships with organizations like schools or nonprofits or governments that actually buy and manage devices and get them in the hands of children. The platform itself, functionally what it does is there's software, there's an app that can be installed that provides a child mode that locks out the use of other apps or the internet, that draws on a library of third-party app content that's available through our app, that's able to control the installation of these different third-party games and continuously measure usage and learning outcomes, and then is able to sync the data and download new apps from the internet, even with periodic access. And finally, the ability to expose an A/B testing framework to researchers so that you can modify different pieces of content from the apps themselves to the learning interface to the personalization algorithms, selecting what apps are available for an individual user or group of users. The way that this is structured is you basically see the device, server, and web interface. So the device software consists of our app, which is a launcher that can be opened from the home screen of any Android device, and then within that, third-party apps that are viewed and used from within our launcher. On the server side, we basically have a library of content that we draw from. We have the controller that determines what is installed, and then we have we store both usage data and learning outcome data, and we're able to use that to create reports for different project partners, as well as to create an experimentation engine that allows researchers and content developers to run A/B tests. And the experimentation component, really, we want to allow research at three levels. The first is the individual apps. So imagine two different vocabulary learning apps and being able to run a randomized experiment to measure the effectiveness of app A versus app B. The second is changes in the learning interface. So a really simple change would be, where are the app icons located? A really complex interface change might be an artificial intelligent avatar that interacts with children in a certain way to guide their learning through this collection of apps. And then finally, the app selection logic, which is what determines what apps are made available for a user or group of users. And so we want to allow experimentation at each level. So instead of creating master apps ourselves, we'll allow partners to run A/B tests and measure the effectiveness of these different apps. So wrapping up, where our organization is now, right now we're really focusing on deploying the app launcher over the next 6 months. We're going to be launching a new service with several partners that should allow us to reach 100,000 children by the end of the year. And once we have enough users, we're then planning on launching the A/B testing framework and making that available particularly to research partners who are interested in using this as a way of conducting research, really at each of these three levels, interventions packaged as apps, versions of the launcher that customize the interface, and app selection personalization algorithms. And so I now would like to open it up for questions and then invite any of you who are interested in learning more and participating and potentially participating in research in the future to reach out to me at my email here or after the call.
Thank you, Taylor. That was inspiring, especially the results you seem to be getting with your education platform. Let me ask the audience to press *1 to unmute your phone and ask questions. Scott?
Hi, Taylor. Thank you very much. This is Scott McLeod from the San Francisco Bay Area. I posted my question in the text chat as well. I'm curious what your smaller language learning and translation strategy might be for education, for research, and for learning about this process from what students learn, but also interlingually.
Yeah, so where we are, we're pretty early on that front. I mean, what we've done so far is we have two really involved partners, one in Peru, one in South Africa, that are doing local language curation and are starting to translate some apps. And so the approach that we piloted, but we don't have the resources to scale yet, is basically to identify a corpus of apps for each kind of grade level of content, and look at apps that are designed in a way that they're easy to translate simply by substituting text, audio, and images. And so the idea is basically to have a situation where for 30 to 50 apps for each grade, we're able to all we have to do is substitute text, audio, and image resources and then repackage the APK for each language. And we're planning on working through the same partners we use to deploy the system, since we're not running operations on the ground, to mobilize volunteers in their communities to actually translate both the text and audio from the starting language, which in this case is mostly English, to the local languages. And that's an area of work that's going to require a lot of innovation and a fair amount of resources over the next few years. So right now it's primarily English content, though that's something that we definitely need to work on.
Great, thank you. Well, World University and School, of which I'm the founder, seeks to emerge out of Wikidata, which is Wikipedia's database in 350 languages. So I'd love to talk with you further.
We're all great.
Excited about all of this. Wiktionary, too, which is Wikipedia's dictionary with lexemes as basic units, could be helpful here, too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Taylor, this is Jim Sporer. I just wanted to thank you for presenting on the call. I'm sorry I'm late joining, but I'm really excited about this and glad that you could present today. So thank you, Taylor.
Thanks, Jim.
Other questions? I have a question, Taylor. Given that there are 200,000 education apps that exist today, how big is your content team that does the curation?
So the content team is pretty small. There are 2 people on the content team internally, as well as probably 5 or 6 people externally who are involved. So we have, our team right now is very small. We have 6 people full time and are going to be hiring another 2 in the next few months. And we have we have partnerships right now with 6 different universities. So there's probably another 6 to 10 kind of full-time people working on the project, spread out among PIs and grad students and postdocs in these different labs. But as a result of that, of the hundreds of thousands of education apps and tens of thousands of early learning apps that are available, we've basically have curated a couple of hundred, and so there's a lot of potential work to do on that front once we have a bigger team to do it.
Impressive. We have time for one more quick question, if anyone has it. All right, well, this is very impressive. I wish you lots of luck, Taylor, and it looks like this is going to be something that's very useful to, as you said, countries and regions that don't have access to great education. So thank you very much for this talk, and audience, we will see you next week.
Thanks so much, Diane. Thanks, everyone.